Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. What was supposed to be a quiet election year gets a little noisier this weekend, at least in the New Orleans area, as runoffs are held to fill a congressional vacancy and a Metairie area legislative seat. We will examine the issues and the politics. The biggest story this week was the Derek Chauvin verdict for the death of George Floyd. We'll get a local perspective. We'll also look at the latest COVID guidelines, as well as the activities at the legislature and the search for the missing crewmen in the Gulf. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Tyler Bridges, also reporter with the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Let's go on over to E first and get the latest on COVID, and then also you're going to update us about the search for the missing crewmen from the Sea Corps power that capsized in the Gulf.
Okay. Well, on COVID, this was the week a lot of people were hoping where we get a yes or no about removing the mask, and what we got was a maybe. And the maybe is going to be dependent on Wednesday, because that would be the deadline for the last orders that the governor issued that we're under right now. So he said he still needs to look at more numbers before making a final decision. Overall, the mood was sort of optimistic. There was a slight increases in new cases, but nothing really critical. As far as the vaccinations, 25% of the state has the full vaccination. About 31% has the partial vaccination. And so that's going. But the big concern, and what the governor mentioned, and the thing that may just be the stumbling block for all of this, is that not enough people are getting vaccinations. Only Alabama and Mississippi have worse records than Louisiana. And it's not because they can't. In fact, the state has an oversupply of vaccines now. There was some that were heading our way, and the state had to ask, well, just hold them for a while because we're not ready yet. And so there's far more vaccine allotted to us than there is the demand right now. And that's the big effort. And there's an effort throughout all communities just to get people out there and do it. So anybody who wants to can do it. And so you assume that once all that happens, that we've really passed a really major obstacle. The Johnson & Johnson thing is still being held, but that's not an issue for us right now because, again, we already have more than we need of the others at this point.
This vaccine hesitancy, what are they going to do about it and try to get more people vaccinated?
Well, they tried to give out booze at bars. That was one thing, okay? And if that
wasn't the state, no, was it?
Yeah. I think it's different people appealing to their group. Even the governor said that he knows that there are some people in the state who won't be persuaded by hearing him, that there needs to be other people, other community leaders, and in churches and pastors or community leaders. I think those are the kind of people that need to go out and get these people out getting vaccinated.
Yeah, nonprofit groups that do a lot of civic activity also. The issue that story that you wanted to touch on, which is still such a tragic story. The search continues now, I think, for 7 missing crew members from that lift boat that overturned in the Gulf.
Yeah, there were 7 in the past week or so. There have been 6 more bodies recovered. Of course, there were 6 who survived at the beginning. Right. We're seeing a little bit of the bits and pieces of what happens in this kind of tragedy. The first funeral was this week, and that was the funeral of the captain. We've also saw the first lawsuit, and that was $25 million for one of the widows. Mm-hmm. And we saw also the Coast Guard, which says, look, we're going as far as we can go as far as our rescue efforts. And so they sounded very sincere and very disappointed, but there's a point where there's just nothing more they can do. Right. Now, there are still people searching, who are hired by the company, who are looking, but it's not. But the Coast Guard has done its part, and so it's really slowed down. And I think that's the way it's going to be from now on.
Yeah, the company that owns the boat, they had hired private divers who continued to search the submerged vessel. But then also there's some private individuals and something called the United Cajun Navy. Of course, we know the Cajun Navy. That have been flying seaplanes over it, too, to try to help in the search.
Yeah, the first 6 bodies found, they were found by 6 different sources, like a couple of private boats, and I think a couple of Coast Guard boats. And so there was a diversity of people who were inspecting at the beginning. But now I think it's pretty realized that what has not been found, the bodies that have not been found, are probably in the boat, submerged in the boat. And that's a whole different thing, and that's where you really need some real skill. And so you need to have the private divers.
And of course, that search continues, and it's just really, torture for those families. All right, E, thanks a lot. We're going to move over to Will right now, because this week there was a verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial regarding the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and the verdict was guilty, 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 murder. And so you wrote a piece about this, and also reflecting on what it means overall, locally.
It was not a happy day, but it was a day for a sigh of relief for me and a number of people who've been challenged since May 25th of last year, when George Floyd was killed on that Minneapolis street. Of course, we know we had a summer of demonstrations and protests and a number of things that have happened since then. And so a lot of people were looking to see what would happen with the verdict in the trial, and then what would happen the same day, the night, and the next day, the verdict in the trial. If this had gone in another direction with 1 guilty versus 3, or not guilty on all things, we might have been looking at something very different later that day, that night, and the next day. Thank goodness for a lot of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the nation with the guilty verdicts. We did not have some of the challenges that we might have otherwise faced. But it also was a time to cause us to reflect and think about how we can avoid this, what are the things that might happen. And a lot of that, as is often the case when something like this happens, it's about policy, and it's about putting things in place that won't be 100% fail-proof, but things that will help. And so we have the George Floyd reform bill in Congress, and that would ban chokeholds and qualified immunity and ban no-knock warrants and do things like that. But we also need to do those kinds of things at the state level. We do have some legislation in the State House in Louisiana being considered. And we also heard that the Justice Department is looking into the Minneapolis Police Department for ongoing situations. And we have had that in New Orleans, and New Orleans has made a number of changes as a result of some federal oversight. Wants to have that, but if it's taken in the spirit in which it is intended to make improvements, I think that's what we all want to see.
The jury came back and pretty quickly on the 3 charges, guilty on the 3 charges, 2 and 3 murder, and then manslaughter charge. And the prosecutor, in his closing, just reminded the jury, just believe what you see. And of course, he was referring to the video. And I know that's something that you refer to also, is body cam video and other video now, how it really is playing a big role.
Well, we have had a number of cases where there's been video of different types in recent years. I mean, for that matter, there was video in the Rodney King case, and that didn't help immediately with the initial trial. But what's happened now is that the video capability is in the hands of many more of us, because we have cell phones that take pictures, and that record video. We also have had demands for body cameras, and we need more police departments and jurisdictions to make the decision to have body cameras. But it doesn't really end there, because if you have the body cameras, you have the video, and you don't release it, and you don't provide it, there's a lack of transparency. So we have to get to a better place. Why we have body camera in the first place?
Of course, New Orleans Police Department has been under a consent decree, a federal consent decree, for several years, and now they're looking to get out from under it. But certainly body cams was one part of it. And the police training is just a really big, important part of police reform.
It's a big part, and I was very happy last year, not long after the George Floyd killing, that St. Tammany Parish Sheriff decided to announce that they would move in that direction and get body cameras. Of course, Jefferson Parish has continued to resist that. But got to get to a better place where we're looking at these as resources that are going to be helpful. I don't think we want any of our municipalities or parishes paying multi-million-dollar payments because of cases like the George Floyd situation and others. But I mean, so often they argue budget, and the budget is, maybe it's 300,000, maybe it's 400,000, maybe it's 500, maybe it's 36,000, and the price of investing into the body cameras and the storage does not outweigh what we can save in terms of respect, transparency, protecting the lives of police officers and citizens.
Right, very important point. Protecting the lives of both the police officers and the citizens. So we'll see how this all moves along. Thanks a lot, Will. Right now we're going to move on over first to Tyler to talk about congressional runoff tomorrow, 2nd Congressional District. So the candidates, give us a quick background on both of the candidates who are seeking that seat.
Yeah, the election, as you mentioned, is indeed tomorrow. It's the runoff election between Karen Carter Peterson and Troy Carter. They're both Democratic state senators from New Orleans. They both have run for this seat before in 2006, neither one, and also Troy Carter ran for the seat in 2008. And of course, the seat is now vacant because of the resignation of Cedric Richmond to be an advisor to President Biden. And
in considering these two candidates, I mean, what kind of background do they come from in terms of politically?
Well, they represent different political factions in New Orleans. Karen Carter Peterson represents is really the titular head of the Bold political organization, and Troy Carter is from the West Bank, Algiers, and he has aligned himself with Cedric Richmond, who has endorsed Troy Carter. Also, the mayor Cantrell has endorsed Karen Carter Peterson. The district attorney, Jason Williams, has lined up with Troy Carter, and then national figures have also lined up with one candidate or another. And also, I guess it's worth pointing out, because the district does extend to Baton Rouge, that Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome also has endorsed Troy Carter.
And Karen Carter Peterson's dad was Ken Carter, who was one of the early leaders of the Bold political organization. It was one of the first to achieve elected office, and ultimately became the assessor. A very affable man. So he made a lot of contacts in the community. As did Bold. Bold was one of the more successful political organizations.
Stephanie, I'm going over to you. I mean, both of these candidates have been involved in either state or local politics for a long time.
Decades,
so
yes.
yeah, so we have an idea where they stand on issues, but what sort of divides them on issues?
Well, again, they're very similar politically. They will vote for the Biden agenda. They will vote for the Nancy Pelosi agenda. There really isn't going to be a lot of daylight there. So it's kind of a matter of degree. Karen Carter Peterson has positioned herself as kind of the more progressive of the two. Again, it's a matter of degree. If you take issues like health care, both of them say they're for Medicare for all, but they have different definitions of what they mean by that. Karen Carter Peterson endorses the single-payer, no more employer-based insurance plan that is more in line with Elizabeth Warren, who has endorsed her, Bernie Sanders. Troy Carter wants to basically add a public option, but if you have employer-based insurance and you like it, you can keep it. So that's the Biden plan. So his politics are really pretty much in line with the president's. they don't line up exactly that way on every issue. For example, Karen Carter Peterson was one of the early leaders of the charter school movement, which was a little more conservative, and their endorsements kind of break up by ideology a little bit, but not entirely. For example, Jason Williams, as Tyler mentioned, the new DA, was the more progressive of the DA candidates last year. He's endorsing Troy Carter. Karen Carter Peterson was very involved in Kiva Landrum's campaign. She was the kind of more centrist candidate. So it's kind of ideology, and it's kind of factions, and it's very much personality, I'd say, because Karen Carter Peterson, you listen to the word she used. She's a fighter. She's going to go in there and shake things up. She's someone who has done that in Baton Rouge. She has fans, and she's made some enemies that way. Troy Carter, she accuses him of being go along, get along. The people who support him say, he's someone that will work with a wider variety of people, even Republicans, because he has an endorsement from the greater New Orleans Republican PAC. Of course, there are some Republicans in the district, even though it's a largely Democratic district. She's saying, that means he's aligned with Donald Trump. And he's saying, look, I represent the whole district. I need to work with everybody. And again, that is probably more the philosophy of Cedric Richmond, the person who is endorsing him, who he's seeking to replace, who was very much an ideological Democrat, but also had good relations with Steve Scalise, Garrett Graves, the Republicans in the surrounding districts.
And who knows, that tiny Republican vote could be the swing vote in this election. It could make the difference.
Yeah, and Troy Carter has made a point of that. I cover him in Baton Rouge along with Senator Peterson. And Troy Carter is an affable guy. He seems to get along with everybody, the Republicans. It's very striking to me that there are 8 black Democrats in the state Senate who are not running in this race. All 8 have endorsed Troy Carter. And I have to say that in the Capitol, it's hard to just about everybody you run into, and you talked about the race, they've had a run-in with Karen Carter Peterson where they feel like she's mistreated them, she's berated them. It's interesting talking to reporters. She won't seem to talk to reporters unless it's an election year. I had a reporter joke with me just the other day about it. Voters might want to consider whether those sorts of things matter, or do you want, again, Karen Carter Peterson is someone who has a very strong voice, particularly she'll be a strong voice on issues like abortion and social justice.
Well, as we noted, they've been around for a while, both of them, in politics, long enough to have some controversy swirl around them. Tyler?
Yeah, I did a story early in the campaign with Troy Carter with a house of his in Algiers Point that had burned, and he took a long time to get moving on renovating that, and really upset the neighbors. And again, the issue with Karen Carter Peterson, does she have the proper temperament? Again, women and men and blacks and whites raised that question about her in Baton Rouge, and she's missed a lot of votes. I just did a story that even on abortion, she's an outspoken proponent of abortion, of the 24 key votes over the last 5 years. She missed 11 of those votes. And as her response to that is that she's a bold and courageous fighter, and we'll take that to Washington as well.
Emily's List has put a lot of money into her campaign, hasn't it?
Yeah, Emily's List, interestingly enough, in the runoff election, this is a group that supports pro-choice Democratic women, is spending more money on this election than in the runoff than either Troy Carter is or Karen Carter Peterson is, and they've been spending a lot of money attacking Troy Carter, even though he is a pro-choice Democrat. Again, he's not as outspoken as Karen Carter Peterson is on the issue, but he's actually voted more times against the anti-abortion crowd in the last 5 years because of her missed votes on that issue.
As you reported, Tyler, he's also taken a few votes that are more in the anti-abortion camp for longer waiting periods, things like that.
Yeah.
Something that also raised the hackles of some people, at the end of last year, Carter Peterson objected to some board appointments made by the governor.
Yeah, that was another story I wrote. She missed 85% of the session in 2020. She said it was because the Republican leadership would not agree to a mask mandate. She missed more votes than any other legislator last year, but she did show up the final day. There was a secret session in the state Senate to confirm appointees of the governors. Normally, it's just a kind of a pro forma affair, but to everyone's surprise, in this secret session, she killed the appointment of Walt Leger, the respected former state representative, to be the chairman of the Montreal Convention Center. And also she killed the appointment of the governor of Ronnie Jones, a respected former state police officer, to continue as chairman of the Louisiana Gaming Control Board.
There were two of several others, including State Museum Board appointees, or nominees, I should say. So anyway, election tomorrow. We've heard about the two candidates. I know there's been a lot of media about it, a lot of mail-outs. Go to the polls tomorrow to cast your vote.
Yeah, I just wish people, even if you don't like one candidate that much, still turn out. I mean, this is the essence of democracy.
Yeah.
So I really hope people in that 2nd congressional district will exercise their right to choose a candidate who will probably hold that seat for a number of years.
Yeah, low turnout, though, unfortunately, is expected. So let's hopefully maybe we get those numbers to rise. Because, Tyler, you have been appealing to the voters to go out there and exercise their right to vote.
I really believe in it.
I can tell. Okay, Stephanie, let's go over to you. Also in Metairie, there is a race for a runoff for a House seat, state House seat.
Another special election. Those tend to get outsized attention because everyone's not running at the same time. This is a vacancy in a state house district in Jefferson Parish, Metairie, Jefferson, that part. It's the old Steve Scalise district, if you remember. Held by Steve Scalise, then held by Cameron Henry, who was a pretty prominent figure. He was an appropriations chairman, a big adversary of John Bell Edwards for 12 years. He termed out and went to the Senate. His brother, Charles Henry, ran for the seat. Also, like Cameron Henry, he had been an aide to Steve Scalise. And it was long planned that was kind of the succession plan for that seat. And Charles Henry didn't even stay a year before he resigned. For personal reasons, he said, wanted to go back to the private sector. Pandemic, kind of changed his priorities, he said. So this is the first really competitive race in this district in a long time. The runoff is down to 2 Republicans. One of them, both familiar last names, I should say, Connick versus Schlegel. Connick is Eddie Connick. He is the first cousin of the DA, Paul Connick, also the state senator, Pat Connick from the West Bank. And Laurie Schlegel is the wife of a judge, Scott Schlegel. So, and they're both conservative Republicans. It's a conservative district, but it's gotten nasty, I have to say. The accusations back and forth. Laurie Schlegel has basically said Eddie Connick's running on the family name and kind of a dynasty and feels entitled to it. He's a retiring business executive. He had this, one of the stranger mailers I've ever seen, where he basically said, she's a social worker and therefore she will spend all your money on social programs. And one, she's actually not a social worker. She's a counselor, a licensed professional counselor. And that's not a usual, social workers aren't a usual political punching bag. And I think, that rubs some people the wrong way, that these are people who kind of do some very important work for very little money. It's a profession dominated by women. Anyway, so, but they've just been going at each other. And it's, I think it's very competitive. I think Connick going in based on name recognition was the favorite, but was even thinking that he might win in the primary. But this should be close.
It's okay. Well, we'll see the results tomorrow night, because once again, Election Day is tomorrow. Okay, yes. Tyler, let's wrap it up with you. Quick overview of what's going on in the legislature. Medical marijuana, smoking it, has moved out of committee.
Right, yeah, the legislature has met for 2 of the 8 weeks, and the legislative committee just breezed out of there a bill that would allow people to begin consuming medical marijuana in the smokable form, which is apparently a lot cheaper than in the current tincture form. So that has gone forward. Interestingly enough, how even in a Republican legislature, conservative legislature, moves to expand access to medical marijuana are advancing. I'm not sure if there's also a bill to allow recreational marijuana, smoking marijuana. Not sure yet whether that will pass. Pretty soon we're going to be hearing a lot about the budget this year, which will be in a lot better shape thanks to all the money coming from the federal government. I wrote a story this past week about the effort to move a shuttered casino from Bossier City to Slidell. and it passed a state Senate committee, which was the first step. It passed on a 4-3 vote. The chairman of the committee, Gary Smith, a Democrat from Norco, cast the tie-breaking vote, and as I reported, his wife is one of the 19 lobbyists working for the boat owner to move that facility to, or the license to, Slidell.
And he cast the deciding vote to get it out of committee.
He cast the tie, yeah, he did do that, and Family Forum, a religious organization in Baton Rouge, has raised questions about that. Some people might think it's an ethics issue, and can the chairman of the committee cast the tie-breaking vote when his wife is working as a lobbyist for the casino? But it seems to be okay. After all, this is Louisiana.
He said she didn't tell him.
Yeah, that's right. He said, and then I also did a story. I also did a story this past week out of Baton Rouge, where the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, which is the state's most powerful business lobby, that they were planning to hold an event Tuesday morning at their headquarters in Baton Rouge. Advised women legislators and women lobbyists to bring your own makeup bag, and they would be able to get a hairstyle and have bagels and coffee. And I know, Stephanie, you wrote a column about it after the event was canceled after my story appeared in The Advocate.
Stephanie, what did women think about that? Women legislators, what were some of their reactions to this?
Well, some of them, Mandy Landry actually from New Orleans, Tyler interviewed her, and she said, look, we're only 18%. It's hard enough to be taken seriously when there are so few of us, so we don't need this. And, the idea is if there are these kind of boys club situations, then the trick is not to, have places where some legislators can't go, right? Not to set up separate kind of frivolous things, some might argue.
Have hair and makeup done. Okay,
Yes.
It's time for other stories. E.
Well, some baseball news. If you remember the baby cakes at the end of 2019 moved to Wichita. They didn't play at all last year because there was no minor league baseball throughout the nation because of COVID. So the Wichita team is about to make its debut in May. The name they selected is the Wind Surge. And when the name was announced, the people in Wichita hated that name as much as the people in New Orleans hated baby cakes. And there were even petitions to try to get rid of it, but it's still the Wind Surge.
All right, good luck to the Wind Surge. Will?
I know it's athletics, but the Southwestern Athletic Conference has interesting developments in the last few days. The Southern University coaching, that was a shocker for a lot of folks, headed off to Norfolk State after several successful seasons. Grambling State's athletics director, Rusty Ponton, is moving over into another position, and that's going to open up a tremendous opportunity for a legacy program. And the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff's president is a finalist for the LSU presidency.
Okay, all right.
For people who follow SWAC, these are important things.
Okay, real quick, you two, Stephanie, real quick.
LSU presidency, there are other finalists. One of them is Jay Darden, the Commissioner of Administration. Right. One is Jim Henderson, the head of the UL system. Obviously a very big deal in the midst of this scandal, of this sexual harassment scandal.
A big deal. Tyler, real quick with you.
Yeah, just again, encourage people to vote. They're two talented and successful politicians. And if you don't like either of them, you can always, with a machine, you can hold your nose and vote at the same time.
But go vote.
But go vote.
Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you all for joining us too. See you again next week for Informed Sources every week.